Hello and welcome to A City That Works, a brand new podcast from the Finsbury Institute at City St George's, University of London, dedicated to finding real-world solutions to enable the City of London to thrive. I'm Professor Diana Beech, Director of the Finsbury Institute, and your host for this series. We are living in a time of profound economic, technological and social change. And at the Finsbury Institute, we're experiencing these changes right in the heart of the City of London. Our institute and this podcast exists to bring research, policy and practice together to ensure the City of London remains a globally competitive and socially vibrant city in which to live, work, invest and trade. In this episode, we're looking at the city as a cyber city and the threats and opportunities around data and digital technologies, including, of course, AI. Joining me are Adham Harker, Senior Associate in the Media and Communications Law Team at City-based law firm Brett Wilson.
You had intimate images flying around of teenagers and young adults with absolutely no idea of the consequences and the permanence of those images existing. And it was only 2015 where intimate image abuse became part of the legislation.
And Dr Elinor Carmi, Senior Lecturer in Data Politics and Social Justice here at City St George's.
How much power do these companies have over our lives? They were saying, oh, you need to regulate us because our technologies are really dangerous. Donald Trump said, oh, but if you're going to put a tax on us, we're going to put 100% tariffs on you.
Right, so let's jump in. So when I think of critical infrastructure around global cities, I often think of things like roads, railways and energy networks. But should we now think of digital and data infrastructure in the same way as well? And by that I mean the collection, the storage, the processing and the managing of information digitally. Maybe Elinor, I could come to you first.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. I think the way that I think about infrastructure is in two ways. One of them is what you said, all of the kind of the physical stuff, right? Like if you thought about trains and things like that, today we have data centers, right? And in London, there are a few attempts to have data centers across the city. I can say that in my neighborhood, which is Brick Lane, there are extreme fights against a data center, and I'm happy to kind of elaborate on that. But I think that we're seeing that these infrastructure are very physical. I think that sometimes when people think about AI and data and the cloud, it's that kind of immaterial thing that exists somewhere in the cloud. No. It has very material infrastructure and consequences on the city and on our lives. And the second thing that I want to emphasize is that infrastructure is also people, right? So even if you think about the trains, right, people are maintaining that infrastructure. And I think that it's really important to remember that also in the data and AI industries, when we're thinking about the infrastructure, you have actual people who are helping to maintain that. They're usually not in the city. They're usually in third world countries. And we talk about that quite a lot in our new MSc called Data Policy and Society. So for those of you who kind of want to get a critical understanding of the AI and data industries, that's the place for you.
Absolutely love the plug for our course at City St George's.
Yes, I have to.
But you're right, actually. The cloud seems nice and fluffy and quite innocent, but there's often quite, moral and ethical issues behind it. Is that something you see, Adham, in your work in the legal services?
We often do. There are quite interesting intersections between where a data center is located and where it is operated from in terms of the data processed by it. So just because Equinix or Virtus has a data center in Essex or London doesn't mean that when you want to write for a client to try to establish the processing of their data by a random unconnected third party, just a random company whose data happens to flow through that data center, it doesn't mean that you aren't often pushed into being told that the domain you're writing about is hosted in a developing country or a country which is not aligned with our data protection legislation. So where the data center is not always the most important thing for an end user wanting to exercise their rights.
I think that topic of place and space is quite important, like for this conversation about cities. I'm just wondering what organisations are most concerned with data infrastructure in a city. We both said we all have it in our lives, but what type of organisations are the big players? Maybe again, Elinor, I can come back to you.
Yeah, I actually want to go back to what we talked about in terms of infrastructure. I think it's important. So, Brick Lane is one of the neighborhoods where a lot of our students actually come from. It's a very famous Bangladeshi community. There's been a lot of fights around that. And actually, I feel like a lot of infrastructure debates are around the power of local compared to global. And actually, the local community of Tower Hamlets was objecting that development, and it was overridden by the Minister of Housing, Steve Reed. So I think when we're thinking about these discussions, and especially if we're thinking about London, I think these discussions of power, of who has the power to decide about the quality. So while Adam said, in terms of the end user, yes. In terms of the processing, no. But in terms of how data centers will have huge consequences on our energy bill, on our water quality, on our air quality, that has huge consequences on our everyday life. And I think that it's important to emphasize that it has very material consequences. And we're seeing a lot of fights over in the US around communities that are objecting these kind of huge data centers. So yeah, and kind of moving on to what you said in terms of which organizations hold a lot of the data processing, I think one of the obvious answers is the council, right? Like the council, local councils, again, hold a lot of information about us in different kind of ways, about our health, about the cameras that we have in the streets as well. They're processing that data. I have a PhD student, Liv Owens, who is examining how local communities understand their data, and they're working in the Hackney and Tower Hamlets communities and kind of trying to understand how people understand the data that the councils have on them. So I think that that's kind of really interesting discussions to have.
It's really interesting because I have to say, when you put the media on, you hear a lot about tech bros. We know that they've got the data, but we don't really think of those really local implications.
Yeah.
Again, Adam, is that what you see?
Well, it is, but there's also the Tower Hamlets, Brick Lane area specifically is a fascinating one when data's concerned, because I wasn't particularly on top of the local feeling about a new data center in that area, but there are national headlines about data and Tower Hamlets to do with the Chinese Super Embassy planning application, because it was intended to go quite deep under London, that embassy. And there are concerns that the fibre optic cables would be very vulnerable. And when we talk about data vulnerability, we often think of phishing and cyber attacks being cloud-based or in space. We don't think of them as being a physical attack. But one of the major concerns that led to quite complex planning considerations for the Chinese Super Embassy was how close that sub-basement would get to critical data infrastructure. And when you have countries who have very questionable data practices, having access to data which, we talk about health data from the council and things like CCTV from the council, but most people are slightly less concerned about that than they are about national security data issues, because some of the data that goes down those cables are data that comes from government to government, diplomatic communications, and things like that are more, they're a national security issue. Lots of people, I'm not one of them, take the view that if China knows what I look up on my phone, I don't really care because I'm not doing anything wrong. But that's the start of a very slippery slope.
It's important that we're talking about the concerns that some people have around digital infrastructure, but let's flip it a little bit and think about what are the risks if cities don't invest in digital and data infrastructure. Maybe Adam, I can come back to you.
I think the concerns are very different depending on what your interest is. So as an individual, your interest is in not having a slower, poorer performing network and not having integrated services at the point of use that you want. If you're a business, you need critical data infrastructure to be reliable, beyond anything else. And if it's not reliable, if it doesn't do what you're expecting it to do when you're expecting it to do it, it has a financial implication. And then taking it a level further from a government's perspective, if you're trying to compete with Singapore and Hong Kong on gaining critical projects and encouraging the big players, we talked about Virtus being one of the data center operators, but also when you talk about Google, Microsoft, Amazon investing in their AI businesses in England and Wales in particular, if you don't have the technological infrastructure to underpin that, they will simply go elsewhere.
Yeah, so maybe Elinor, I can come back to you. What do we say to those people in Brick Lane? Like, how do we convince them that they need this infrastructure?
I think, again, infrastructure to me always comes down to people, right? And I think it's interesting that we had actually two really great initiatives from the government around media literacy and also digital inclusion. So these are topics that I do in my own work. And I think that while, the infrastructure is important, but if people don't have access, like Adam was saying, or they don't know how to use these technology in a way that kind of, is citizen informed, then that is a problem as well. So I think one of the key issues is to not always think about the technology, is to think about the people that it relates to, and how can we make it, first of all, more accessible to more people, right? So more people will have, and again, it's important to remember that in the UK, we still have a lot of people who are not connected to the internet. Even those who are connected to the internet do not necessarily have the appropriate media and digital and data literacies. So I see these as kind of things that are entangled together, and we need to think about them together.
Yeah. Thanks for highlighting some of the initiatives that the government in the UK has done in this space. They're certainly becoming a little bit more interventionist at the moment. We're recording this episode not long after the government decided in June 2026 to ban social media for under 16-year-olds. And I'm not sure how I feel about that, actually. I'm pretty on the fence. I can hear both sides of the argument. So maybe I could just ask you, first of all, how you feel about that. Elinor?
I have a lot of feelings. I personally think that the discussion around the ban is a distraction from bigger questions that we need to ask about the social media companies' regulation, which we don't really have currently. And I'm part of the Online Safety Act network. We actually sent a letter yesterday to the next prime minister, who's probably going to be Andy Burnham, about, again, I don't know, I'm guessing, but I think that it's very clear that so far the UK has been too friendly with social media companies. And the problem is that if social media companies would design their products to be safe, we wouldn't even need a ban, right? So I think that that's kind of the discussions we need to have. And another discussion that we need to have is how much power do these companies have over our lives? We've seen the G7 meeting that was happening, I think, last week, where we saw the tech companies being at the table with other world leaders, which is quite concerning. And there they were saying, oh, you need to regulate us because our technologies are really dangerous. And then a few days afterwards, we heard that Donald Trump said, oh, but if you're going to put a tax on us, we're going to put 100% tariffs on you. So I think that we need to, and all of the stuff that you said about sovereignty, I think that these discussions are happening because there is a realization that we have an over-reliance on US technology, which, as Adam said, does not align with our data protection legal frameworks at all. So to me, the ban is just a distraction from bigger conversations we need to have about how social media companies should have better protections to begin with, and not for kids only, by the way. People, adults are also harmed by these technologies. So regulating them more, and also how much power these technologies have, and thinking about kind of separating that huge dependency from the US companies.
I was waiting to see how long we could get into this conversation before Donald Trump came up, but the award goes to you, Elinor.
Yeah, okay.
Adam, you must be all over this from a legal perspective, and maybe I'll give you the opportunity to come back on what Elinor said, but can I also ask you, do measures like this risk setting a precedent as well for more extensive regulation of data and digital infrastructure, including AI, sort of more widely?
I don't think it sets a precedent. I think that there is a very significant pacing issue. Technology develops, and then sometime later, normally quite shortly later, research is done by interested academics or focus groups. Then there is social awareness, and then there is regulation. And quite often that regulation comes a decade or 2 decades after the technology has already become embedded in society. When I was sort of 14 through 16, camera phones started becoming a thing for some children. After that, you had intimate images flying around of teenagers and young adults with absolutely no idea of the consequences and the permanence of those images existing because of the recency. And it was only 2015 where intimate image abuse became part of the legislation. I wouldn't say that the risk of more regulation is necessarily a problem. It's the nature of the regulation and how it can be managed in a way which tackles problems, not just puts regulation in for the sake of political expedience and being able to say, look, we've done something. You mentioned the G7, Elinor. Unless there is a solution which includes the US, I don't think it is a solution which can help here beyond some fringe cases, because VPNs just allow very easy access to change your location to a country which does allow access. So there's a real problem that we're looking at as the UK, national solutions to global issues.
That's a big challenge. We'll get a global movement together. Maybe, Elinor, I can stick to this idea of challenges that Adham's raised and ask you, what are the other challenges of stricter regulation when it comes to data and digital technologies? We've just heard getting everyone together globally is one of them. What else is there?
I think to me, one of the main issues is enforcement, right? So we actually have a lot of really great legal frameworks, such as the GDPR and others, but the way that they have been enforced has been extremely poor. And the majority of times, the main kind of instrument is, oh, we're going to fine you, which obviously doesn't make any sense because these companies are the part of the most profitable companies in the world. And there aren't any proper mechanisms that would actually deter them from doing what they are doing over time. So I actually have a research that's supposed to come hopefully in the next few months, where I've been examining the governance structure of the pharmaceutical industry and kind of how they develop the different kind of regulation and trying to see how we can kind of move that to the AI and social media companies. And I think that I completely agree with Adham that we need a global collaboration. That's exactly what we've seen with the pharmaceutical companies. However, I think that while we do need the US in the table, I think that what we shouldn't have is the US a disproportionate amount of power in that table, right? And I think that we're seeing that they have disproportionate amount of power here, right? We're seeing that Palantir has NHS data. People are fighting that at the moment. And a lot of the AI companies are funneling a lot of money to political candidates now before the midterm election in the US. So I think that I'm seeing it as a problem of who is dominating these debates and how they can be regulated in a way that makes sense for us. And I think that it's very clear that the regulation that has passed in the EU is very different from the US, but we can't wait for the US to kind of decide, okay, now we're going to also be a bit more kind of thinking about human rights and all of these kind of things. So I do agree that we definitely need a global collaboration. But as I show with the pharmaceutical industry, and I think that Adham is right in terms of like, oh, we have regulation many times after a technology is coming to fruition and it becomes more mature, because only then we understand, oh, it actually hurts us in this way. And I think that we are in a position now that we realize that while social media and AI have a lot of potential and bring a lot of good things, we also need to think about how to make sure that they don't harm our societies, our environment, our democracies. That I think should be at the top of our priorities.
We'll keep an eye out for your research findings, Elinor. Good luck with that. Maybe that's a future podcast episode. You can come back and tell us about them. Adam, we've just spoken about the challenges. Can we do the flip side, the opportunities? Are there any opportunities in more robust regulation which could help position London in particular as a trusted global hub for digital innovation?
Yeah, I think there are. There's two sides to that, and Eleanor's mentioned one of them rightly already, that it's not just the regulation, it's the enforcement of the regulation. My impression is that for many organizations, there is an approach to data and data regulation and their obligations that it's easier to get forgiveness than permission to do what they want to do to make money, because the regulators have been pretty toothless, except in the most extreme cases of mass data breach. I wrote 3 years ago now about the need for the Information Commissioner's Office to do more than pay lip service to holding search engine operators' feet to the fire on their obligations. The opportunity that exists in more robust regulation is in ensuring that it is well drafted, easy to understand, and focused on practical effects. Because businesses love certainty. Innovators love certainty. They love to know that what they are doing is not going to be legislated out of existence as soon as it's ready for market. I don't underestimate how hard it is to draft legislation and regulation in that way, because it's a challenge which has very rarely been met. But we can regulate things before they exist. Self-driving cars is an excellent example, where the technology to put them on the road has existed for a decade or so now, but the regulations have been imposed that say you can't do it yet. You need to jump through these hoops in order to do it. There's no reason at all that with image creation from AI, for example, that we couldn't have said, no, this is illegal, until it had been stress tested in a way that didn't have Grok allowing you to do whatever you want. And I mean, Grok's one example. There are probably hundreds of these models now. Grok's the most mainstream of them, perhaps, that allowed this to happen. But a clear and easy to understand regulation is more attractive to business than one which is maybe laxer in its effect, but less clear in precisely what they can and can't do.
I like the idea if we can regulate before things develop, because we hear a lot about how, technology is emerging all the time, and actually we could step back and just see if we could get ahead of the curve. A lot for the people that do it, though, I do appreciate. Maybe I could turn our attention to cyber threats. AI is becoming more powerful. Cyber threats are becoming more sophisticated. So is the challenge today, particularly if you're a policymaker in a city like London, is the challenge about preventing attacks altogether, or building organisations and cities that are resilient enough to withstand them when they do occur? Elinor, maybe I can come to you.
I personally think that we're always going to have cyber attacks. What Adam was saying about the image-based harms that can happen. As you know, Meta has the Meta glasses, right? And people are being pictured, and it's used especially against women in public places. And that's something that we're going to see more and more as an issue. We hear, it's going to stifle innovation. We need to do things really quickly. And I'm like, no, we don't. We really need to flip the switch around that. But yeah, in terms of risk, I think we need to create less incentives around that. So just to give you an example, one of the things that the ICO and Ofcom has not been enforcing properly is fraud ads. We've heard that Meta actually makes a ton of money from fraud ads, right? So we need to demonetize that in order for that not to be profitable, right? A lot of the risks that we know are operating within that system, where you can send fraudulent ads with all of the ad tech industry. So I think once we demonetize a lot of these infrastructures that help a lot of this kind of cybercrime to happen on an individual level and on a national level, I think that would help a bit more. But I don't think that we'll ever see it kind of disappear.
Thanks. Adam, is there a way that policymakers can strike the right balance between protecting citizens and avoiding constraints on innovation?
No. I'm afraid. Because it depends who you're asking as to whether the balance is struck. And innovators and businesses will always say, whether they're right or wrong, they will always say the regulations are too, they impose too high a burden. And individuals wronged by those businesses will always say that the regulations are toothless. For a politician or a policymaker to strike that balance is about reducing the validity of the complaints being aimed at them, not eliminating them entirely, because it again would be naive to think that a perfect balance can be struck. It's always a compromise for somebody.
Thanks. And Elinor, is that something you'd agree with, or do you have a different take?
I tend to agree with that, but I think it's just about changing the mindset, because I think that currently, and again, it might sound kind of big discussions, but we live in a very capitalistic system that prioritizes profit or over the well-being of people. And we're seeing that everywhere, right? So I think as a society, we need to start thinking of, actually, we could design technologies that benefit people and doesn't come at the expense of people. I'm also part of a new organization that is called the Society for Hopeful Technologists, where we're a combination of people who work in tech, academics, digital rights NGOs, who want to kind of promote this kind of more positive. I know that maybe it looked a bit negative what I was saying, but actually I love technology. I'm like #1 adopter of technology. It's great. I met my partner on a dating app. I can go on City Mapper and know when the train is not working. So it's not like I'm against technology, but I just think that it could be designed in a way that benefits us more. And I think that once we start thinking in that way, then companies maybe wouldn't think, oh, we're just trying to put hurdles in your innovation. So I think to me, it's also about kind of switching the record of like, we could be profitable and also benefit society. It's just the insane amount of, if you think about Jeff Bezos, right? He's one of the richest people in the world. If he actually gives his worker better pay, he would still be one of the richest people in the world, right? So this is what I'm saying. There's like such a big difference between, these super rich people who just want more and more money at the expense of workers, at the expense of our society. And it really doesn't have to be like that. I think that billionaires shouldn't exist. It's not something that as a society we should aspire for, we should celebrate. People need to have better pay, and that would actually be better for our economies as well.
Love the enthusiasm, and I want you to channel it into my final question for you both. And I want you to get your crystal balls out and look ahead to 2035, which isn't that far away, actually, when you think about it. But what will make the difference between cities that thrive in the age of AI and those that fall behind? Elinor, can I come back to you?
So again, to me, it's about appreciating workers and thinking about the environmental aspects of the technology and how the city can develop in a way. We just had extreme heat waves, so data centers are definitely not going to help that. So having an infrastructure that can hold all of those technologies and people's well-being, to me, those two aspects are extremely important. And of course, as we said, better regulation and better enforcement.
Thank you. And final word to you, Adham.
I think the ones that will fall behind are the less effectively regulated jurisdictions, because I think they will become regulated out of access. So, for example, if as an example we've used, the US just allows a free hand to technology companies based there, by 2035, I would expect that other countries, the UK maybe not one, maybe one, it may not, but the EU for sure, I think will bind its member states to prevent access to deregulated jurisdictions. And so the thriving ones will probably be those that put in place some kind of effective regulation that prevents AI from taking over, frankly.
Okay, policymakers, if you're listening, I'm hearing effective regulation, effective enforcement, and a real care on people as well, and thinking about their conditions. So thank you both. Thank you to my guests, Adham Harker and Dr Elinor Carmi. And of course, thanks to you for listening. If you have a comment on anything we've discussed, we'd love to hear from you. You can follow the Finsbury Institute on LinkedIn, and you can visit our website at citystgeorges.ac.uk/Finsbury-Institute. We're taking a short break for the summer now, but we'll be back with new episodes in the autumn. In the meantime, please subscribe wherever you receive your podcasts. And thanks also to the School of Policy and Global Affairs for funding this series, and of course to Research Podcasts for the production support.